Good evening and happy spring. My name's Joe Verstandig. I'm the Living Collections Manager at the Newport Tree Conservancy, and I am very excited today to talk to you about one of my favorite groups of trees, the Magnolias. And it's a good time to talk about these plants because right now we're just starting to see some color emerge from the buds on some of the earliest Magnolias. So I think this presentation is a good way to get excited for spring and excited for the flowering trees to brighten our landscapes in Newport and beyond. All right, well, what are we going to be talking about today? We'll start with some taxonomy and evolutionary history of the magnolia, and then we'll talk about just a few of the important magnolia hybridizations that have occurred throughout the cultivation history of the magnolia. We'll talk about some of the signature trees you can witness in Newport blooming this spring and summer. We'll talk about some species and cultivars that would make good landscape plants for your garden. And then I'm going to turn it over to Morgan. She's going to talk about the botany of the magnolia flower and also the magnolia propagation that we've been doing at our nursery. And then I'm going to take it over again and we'll talk a little bit about some of the tips and tricks to best culture these plants in your garden. Let's talk about the taxonomy and evolutionary history of magnolia. A lot of times you hear magnolias referred to as ancient angiosperms, or ancient flowering plants, which have been around about 130 million years, and predated, of course, by the cone-bearing plants of the gymnosperms. On the left is Archaeanthus linenbergii, believed to be one of the oldest members of the Magnolia family, the Magnoliaceae, and it was discovered in the fossil record on a ranch in Kansas. And it's an interesting looking recreation here. The flower, you can tell, is kind of similar to some magnolia species like the southern magnolia. And the leaves, kind of interesting, the way the lobe kind of bisects the midrib. It's reminiscent at least of our native tulip tree, Liriodendron tulipifera. So currently within the Magnolia family, Magnoliaceae, there are two genera. The Magnolias, of course, and the Liriodendron, or the tulip trees. Two species, one North American species, and the Asian species, Liriodendron chinense. Currently, there are over 330 documented species of magnolia from around the world. Recently, a lot of plants have been discovered in Brazil and Colombia are hotspots, so places in Central and South America with great diversity. And then recently, a major taxonomic shift occurred when Mangletia and Michelia were clumped in with Magnolia. And these are plants with beautiful, showy flowers and kind of a tropical look to them, evergreen foliage. They're beautiful trees. And a lot of the new breeding work has included these plants, and the results have been pretty remarkable. So, one of the most important events that occurred in the history of magnolia cultivation happened in near Paris, France, in the early 19th century. This man, Etienne Solange-Bodin, a French soldier and horticulturist, returned from war and immersed himself in his garden. And he crossed Magnolia denudata, the Yulon magnolia, with Magnolia liliflora, the lily magnolia, both native to China, in 1820, and he grew seeds from that cross, and in 1826 the plants flowered, and it was a flower that had never been seen before. You can see here on the right, you can see the Magnolia denudata, white flower, sometimes infused with pink, and Magnolia liliflora, oftentimes kind of this dark rose red or rose pink flower. And what resulted was what we know today as the saucer magnolia, or Magnolia solangiana, named in his honor. And it's one of the most popular magnolias in the United States and really around the world. It's a large tree with these pinkly infused flowers. Etienne would go on to establish the Royal Institute of Horticulture near Paris, and his legacy, of course, is maintained with this amazing flowering tree. The yellow magnolias are interesting. They certainly have captivated a lot of people. They're always bestsellers in nurseries, and a lot of people have a tremendous amount of interest in them. But what's interesting is that a precocious magnolia, or a magnolia that flowers before it leaves out, with yellow color doesn't really exist in nature. There might be species that flower later and have yellow color, but the blooms might be hidden by the foliage, or maybe it's a tropical evergreen species with yellow flowers. But a precocious blooming yellow flowered magnolia didn't exist until the Brooklyn Botanical Garden established the Kitchewan Research Station, a breeding program in Ossining, New York, and three remarkable women, Eva Marie Sperber, Doris Stone, and Lola Cording, spearheaded that work. And I have a video to show. I'm going to play it now of Magnolia Elizabeth, their first introduction in 1977. And it's a cross between Magnolia acuminata and Magnolia denudata. And what's interesting is Magnolia acuminata, the cucumber magnolia, is a native species, and Magnolia denudata is an Asian species. And this was the first time that two species from different sides of the world had been used in hybridization. Magnolia Elizabeth is a great tree. It's quite large. It might get 30, 40 feet tall with a similar width. It blooms just after the earliest magnolias, usually the end of April, maybe finishing off in early May. And it's got these large kind of ivory white, kind of a soft yellow flower, pleasantly fragrant. It's a wonderful tree, and a lot of people like it. The Brooklyn Botanical Garden also introduced plants such as Lois, pictured below, which flowers a little later and has a nice yellow color, a deeper yellow color, and others such as Marilyn and Judy Zook, which we're going to talk about later. Phil Savage was a magnolia breeder, an amateur horticulturist from Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. And he did hybridization work in his home garden beginning in 1960, and he had many trees that he grew from seed that he was trialing in his backyard. And he introduced a number of fantastic plants. You can see Gold Star pictured here is a magnolia we're bringing in actually this week, and we'll have that available for our planting programs in the future. And he also introduced a number of other yellow magnolias such as goldfinch, yellow lantern, and butterflies. And we'll take a look at butterflies a little bit later. Well, you can't discuss magnolias without discussing the Magnolia Society, the Magnolia Society International. A lot of the major figureheads within the history of the cultivation of this great group of plants, a lot of these people were actually involved in the Magnolia Society. So it was built up by the people who knew the genus most. It was founded in 1963. And today it's a group of magnolia enthusiasts and growers, but the spectrum is wide. It includes educators and conservationists and plant scientists and dendrologists and teachers and amateurs and all the like. And the organization is devoted to the appreciation, cultivation, study, and conservation of magnolia. Currently, there are hundreds of members from around the world, including myself. And if you're passionate, I would recommend becoming a member. But if not, I think it's still worth checking out their website. A lot of these key figureheads throughout the history of magnolia cultivation were members, and there's a lot of great resources on their website. You can see pictured here the Magnolia Society Journal, which is published twice annually. The archives exist on the Magnolia Society website, and I would recommend checking it out. There's a lot of great readings there, oftentimes written by the people who were doing the work themselves. And the Global Conservation Consortium of Magnolia is spearheaded by the Atlanta Botanical Garden. And it's a partnership of institutions and individuals who are dedicated to the conservation of magnolia. What a lot of people don't realize is that a staggering number of magnolia species around the world are threatened to some degree. And what this consortium has done is they've actually analyzed a lot of the Magnolia taxa represented in living collections. And the Newport Arboretum has actually taken place in this survey. And what they've done is they've kind of analyzed and took count of what species were conserved ex situ or off-site in Magnolia collections. So there's a lot of magnolias that are, despite being critically endangered in the wild or endangered or threatened to some degree, they are well represented in living collections and thus conserved ex situ. And an interesting case study is the ash magnolia, which is the U.S.'s most threatened magnolia. It's native only to a small portion of Florida's panhandle. And this is a plant that's, despite being endangered and threatened, is actually relatively available in commerce. Some people might be familiar with it. It's similar to, and actually sometimes considered a varietal form of the big leaf magnolia, Magnolia macrophylla. And it's an interesting plant. I know I've seen it a couple times. I know a few people who have it, and it's worth procuring. So let's discuss some of the signature magnolias around Newport. And we're going to start with perhaps Newport's most well-known magnolia to its residents at the Newport Art Museum in front of the Cushing Gallery. And forever, this plant has been known as the star magnolia at the Art Museum. And I was always skeptical when I first witnessed this tree. I was surprised at how massive it was for a star magnolia, and the flowers were large and kind of floppy with these kind of wide tepals. Tepals are the petals of the magnolia flower. So I reached out for help. I contacted Richard Figler, who is the scientific advisor for the Magnolia Society and considered one of the foremost experts on magnolia. And with his help, I was actually able to identify this tree as a hybrid cultivar called Merrill, which was introduced by the Arnold Arboretum many years ago, named in honor of, I believe, their third director. And it's a cross between Magnolia cobus, the cobus magnolia, and Magnolia stellata, which is the star magnolia. So it does have some star magnolia in it, and I think the public will probably always recognize it as the star magnolia, but it was exciting to finally get to the bottom of this identification mystery. It's a beautiful plant and blooms in early April. It's just starting to show some color now. It's brilliantly fragrant, and it is a massive specimen. But we don't believe it's that old. We're getting to the bottom of it. But we have reason to believe it's probably only around 50 or so years old. You can see when it first emerges, you can see these streaks of pink in the tepals. And it really is a massive tree. I've heard it referred to as the octopus tree because of all the limbs that kind of spread out in all directions. And it's actually been pruned back. So when you witness the plant now, it's actually not at its full size. It's a magnificent plant. The lily tree or Yulon magnolia, Magnolia denudata at Chateau-sur-Mer. And we talked a little bit about the Magnolia denudata being one of the parents of the saucer magnolia. Not super well known, but it is visible from Bellevue. It's a big tree. It's probably 25 or 30 feet tall and wide. It blooms in early April, and when it's not damaged by frost, it's one of the most beautiful magnolias I've ever seen. It's kind of got this ivory white color to the tepals. It's got a pleasant fragrance, and it's a magnificent tree. It's in a wonderful setting. You can see here the backdrop is the wonderful house at Chateau-sur-Mer, surrounded by other beautiful trees, like a big weeping beech and weeping hornbeam and other great trees. And the bark, it's got a massive trunk to it. And a lot of people think of magnolia bark as being very smooth and kind of like this dark gray, like an elephant skin gray. But as these trees age, kind of like people, their bark kind of gets weathered and rough and cracked. It's a beautiful trunk. You can see here in the bottom right that the flowers, when they first emerge, are kind of this nice goblet shape to them. You can see there in that picture, there's a little bit of frost damage on the flowers. The cucumber magnolia, Magnolia acuminata, at the Frederick Law Olmsted Park. And this is a tree that's visible from Bellevue, but it's visible from a lot of places. It's a massive tree. It's probably 70 or maybe even 80 feet tall. The cucumber magnolia is a native magnolia, native to the eastern United States from extreme southern Ontario down to Florida. It's not a Rhode Island native, but it grows very well in Newport and around Rhode Island. It can be a massive tree. You can see the individual at the Frederick Law Olmsted Park has kind of two codominant leaders and kind of this rough, scaly bark. And the leaves are large, kind of tropical looking, kind of a lush green color. And this magnolia gets its common name. It's called the cucumber magnolia because when the seed pods are in the green stage, they kind of resemble cucumbers. And I've never seen this tree flower. I'm going to try and catch it this year. It blooms in early May, but a lot of times the flowers are hidden by the leaves because the leaves have fully expanded at that point. So a state champion tree and probably the biggest magnolia that I know of in Newport. The southern magnolia, Magnolia grandiflora on Michael Terrace, is, I believe, the biggest southern magnolia in Newport. And this species has become quite popular in Newport over the last decade or so. I believe this is the biggest. It's got this very distinct pyramidal shape to it, large, kind of undulating green leaves. It is an evergreen species. Magnolia grandiflora is evergreen. Large flowers that bloom from June into July. It's got very sweet fragrance, and you can smell it from a considerable distance away. It's certainly worth visiting any time of year, but probably best to visit it in late June when it's in full bloom. The story goes with this plant that it was brought up as a seedling many years ago by the current homeowner's mother. The tree was brought up from Virginia and was planted near the house, and it's been happy ever since. And it's kind of, you can see it's kind of grown up and over the house. It's not protected at all. And despite the elements, it's done very well. It's a beautiful tree and one of the biggest southern magnolias in Rhode Island, and probably worthy of a third or fourth place state champion. Magnolia cuinensis, Wada's memory at the Redwood Library on Redwood Street. And this is probably the least well-known magnolia of these signature Newport magnolias that I'm going to talk about. Blooms in early April. It's got a very pleasant fragrance. A lot of people would just look at it and say, oh, that's just another star magnolia. But upon closer inspection, you can see that when the tepals emerge from the perules, they've got this kind of yellow-green color. And star magnolia usually has a nice flush of pink when the flowers emerge. The tree is about 25 feet tall with a distinctly pyramidal habit. What's interesting is it kind of blooms on alternate years. One year it'll be very heavy with flowers. The next year, still showy, but not quite the same punch. But what's exciting is this year, judging by the buds, it's going to be a heavy blooming year. So I'm very excited. I'm going to take plenty of photos and definitely hang out with the tree, spend some time with it. And magnolias, a lot of times when you cut the branches or you bruise the roots when you're repotting it, there's a very strong fragrance. And this tree has an exceptionally strong fragrance. Even when you cut small pieces from it, you can smell that kind of smell of anise that permeates in the air. So worth checking out on Redwood Street, Wada's memory. Saucer magnolia, Magnolia salungiana. Again, we talked about the history of this plant. There's a beautiful specimen in Queen Anne Square, which is kind of in the heart of Newport, and this is probably one of the more visible magnolia specimens in town. Blooms in early to mid-April. It's got these beautiful white flowers flushed with streaks of rose pink. Large flowers, not too much fragrance to them. And you can see here the tree has a wonderful branching framework, but unfortunately it's been etched and carved with initials and notes over the years, but the tree doesn't seem to mind all that much, and it's persisted without any issues. And it's a beautiful tree in bloom. You can see here, April 13th, the largest specimen in the park is in full bloom, and recently other trees, other saucer magnolias have been planted with it. So the scene, the spring scene in the park is quite colorful, and it's worth checking out in mid-late April. So let's discuss some good magnolia choices to grow in your home garden. And we'll start with one of the more common magnolias, the star magnolia, Magnolia stellata, native to Japan, where it is considered endangered. It's only native to a few localities there. And it's a large shrub or small tree, often grown with a multi-stem form. Blooms early. It's one of the first trees to bloom. Usually early March, late April, depending on how cold the winter is. Fragrant white flowers, oftentimes with a degree of pink, flushed on the outsides of the tepals. And the tepals are kind of long and strap-like, and usually are numerous in each inflorescence. It's a great magnolia. It's very cold hardy. It can tolerate different types of soils. It is susceptible to a late frost, but it's a good choice for a smaller garden, and it's one of my favorites. Great choice for around the patio where you can enjoy the fragrance, or even in the shrub border, or kind of with evergreens as the backdrop. There's many cultivars of star magnolia that have been selected over the years. Chrysanthemum flora is a plant that I'd like to get my hands on. It's got a deep infusion of kind of a rose pink color to the outside of the tepals, and the flower has a lot of tepals. Each inflorescence may have upwards of 40 tepals, and they're kind of all held tight and towards the around the reproductive structures of the flower. It kind of gives this resemblance of a football mum. So this is a plant I'd love to get my hands on. And then water lily bloomed in our nursery a few years ago. The plant that we had, I gifted to a friend. And it's got this wonderful flower form. The tepals seem to kind of defy gravity, kind of suspended in space. Nice fragrance. And water lily is one of those plants that may be different depending on where you buy it. There's more than one clone in the trade. But water lily, as I saw it, had a nice infusion of pink on the outside of the tepals, and kind of a large flower for a star magnolia in terms of width. And even as a young grafted tree, it was quite floriferous. So, and then Centennial was introduced by the Arnold Arboretum to celebrate their 100th year anniversary, and it's got a high tepal count too. A lot of these star magnolias have been selected for the number of tepals in the inflorescence. It's got a nice fragrance. It might be a little bit larger than some of the other cultivars. And I saw it bloom in late April in Boston, or mid-April, I'm sorry. Ballerina, as I saw it, was one of the most beautiful magnolia flowers I'd ever seen. I thought it was a star magnolia, but upon approach, I realized, wow, this is a big plant. And then, of course, I read the label and discovered it was Ballerina, which was introduced by J.C. McDaniel, a professor at the University of Illinois many years ago. And it's a hybrid cultivar. It's a Liebner type, so it's a Cobus stellata cross, and this beautiful kind of tapered tepals, a nice infusion of pink. Well, you can't really see it in the photos, but as the flower form was just spectacular. It reminded me of a water lily resting on the water surface. It was a large tree. Again, it was probably 30 feet tall and blooming in mid-April. A pleasant fragrance. So as I saw Ballerina, it was an absolutely spectacular flower, and one I'd certainly recommend. Leonard Messel, one of my favorite magnolias. It's been a favorite for a long time. I still remember first seeing it bloom at Blythewald near the Rose Garden, where it's been planted into a hedge. It's another one of these ex Liebneri cultivars, so it's a Cobus stellata cross. It's kind of got the flowers similar to that of Magnolia stellata, kind of these long strap-like tepals. Kind of got this rose pink to purple infusion on the outside of the tepals, white on the inside. And I'm conflicted. I read that this plant is fragrant. I've heard other people tell me it's fragrant. I've got no fragrance when I give it the sniff test. So I'm curious to see what you think, if anybody has experiences with this plant. But as far as I can tell, there's no fragrance, and it might grow to be a little bit larger than star magnolia. I've seen 20, maybe 25 plus foot specimens. It's got a nice rounded habit to it, and it blooms a little bit later, and the flowers are frost resistant, or so I read. I've never seen one injured, but then again, I've only been looking at magnolias for a handful of years, and typically magnolias are damaged around 30 or so, below 30 degrees. So a great plant, Leonard Messel, and widely available, definitely available in the nurseries. Sweet Bay Magnolia, native from Long Island south to Florida, typically near the coast. And this is a magnolia that will tolerate moist conditions well. I've seen it growing in swamps in coastal Maryland. It's a small tree, maybe 20 to 30 feet tall. It will be a larger tree in warmer areas. I know this plant will top out at over 50 feet tall, depending on where it's grown. It blooms in early to midsummer, these lemon-scented off-white flowers that develop into these beautiful conglomerates with these bright red seeds that emerge in the early fall, and the birds love them and will gobble them up quite quickly. The foliage is this nice lustrous green color, and the undersides are a nice silver. So when the plant is kind of blowing in the breeze, there's nice flicks of silver in the landscape. And typically this plant is at least partially evergreen, depending on the winter. It seems like this winter most of the plants that I've observed have defoliated. But cultivars such as Green Shadow and Moonglow, typically under normal conditions, will remain at least partially evergreen. And those are certainly are good cultivars that are readily available. The southeast native, the southern Magnolia grandiflora, Bracken's Brown Beauty. And this is a cultivar that originated in South Carolina, but it's got good cold hardiness, and it's notable for the nice cinnamon brown indumentum on the undersides of the foliage. Large flowers, strongly fragrant. The fragrance is loved by some, disliked by some, tolerated by some. I like the fragrance. And then the seed pods in the fall will split open to reveal these bright seeds. The seed pods are quite large and make for quite a show. And it's a great plant. It works as a great dense screen. It's got these nice glossy evergreen leaves. Got a very full shape to it. It's easy to grow. It will grow pretty quick once it's established and will mature to be quite large. I'm sure it will get 20, 30 feet in a decade, 15 years after planting. Edith Bogue is a southern magnolia that's grown for its cold hardiness. You can see on the left here, this is a signature Newport tree. This is a tree on John Street. It's probably 30, 35 feet tall. It's got a nice pyramidal shape, but it's kind of this open tree. It doesn't have the most dense foliage and branching. And I'd say for that reason, it's probably not quite as good as some of the other cultivars we're growing, like D.D. Blanchard, which is a nice vigorous grower with the brown indumentum on the undersides of the leaves. It's touted as being able to withstand heavy snow, which we seem to get quite often in this area. So looking forward to see that one grow. A native of the southeast, the southern magnolia is perhaps the world's most ubiquitous magnolia. On the top right, on the streets of London, it's grown as a street tree, and then also as a street tree in Pasadena, California on the left. A large tree, probably over 40, 50 feet tall and limbed up for clearance. These trees get quite fat and are very low branched, so they don't always make the best upright street trees like an oak or an elm would. And then in flower in the bottom right, in Washington, D.C., a lot of great trees in the D.C. area. And this tree grows all over. It's been grown in Australia, South Africa, South America, all over Europe and Asia. So grown all over the world, but native to the southeast. Magnolia Galaxy, and this is one that's really popular. It's touted as being upright, but you can see in the photo on the right that over time it will broaden to wider than it is tall, maturing to probably around 30 feet high and 30 feet wide or so. Blooms a little bit later. It's got these very large flowers and this really dark flower color. And because it blooms later, it usually escapes frosts, which is good. The one flaw it has, though, is it readily water sprouts or produces these shoots from the branches that kind of go straight up. So those should be removed. But other than that, it's a vigorous grower. It grows very quickly. We've had trees in Newport that have really taken off. So certainly a good recommendation, especially if you want to see a magnolia grow and flower quickly in your landscape. The Kosar and DeVos hybrids, which originated at the U.S. National Arboretum. And these trees have gone by many names, or I should say the series, the 8 cultivars. They've been called the girls, the little girls, the 8 little girls, the little girls series. And they're typically shrubby growers, maturing to 15 feet tall and wide. You can see on the right, this is a tree, an older tree at the Arnold Arboretum. Now you do have these nice dark flower colors and large flowers, not too much fragrance. Betty on the right here, you can see as the flowers kind of mature, the base of the tepals folds in on itself, and it kind of looks like a ninja star, which is quite interesting. And these cultivars have the propensity to flower in the summertime, and sometimes when they bloom at this time, the flowers don't even really open, and they kind of fall off, still curled up. So these are good smaller magnolias that I would recommend for the smaller landscape. They do have nice colors, and they do bloom later and escape frost damage. Couple Solangiana cultivars. On the left we have Alexandrina, which if you talk to all the old magnolia people, they'll always tell you that the real Alexandrina is not what you're looking at, but in fact an imposter. This plant is a legendary in that regard, and that the fabled original Alexandrina seems to be absent, and other clones with similar flower color, kind of a dark purple pink color to the tepals, the outside of the tepals. But as I've seen it, Alexandrina is still a beautiful plant. Larger tree. Again, these saucer magnolia cultivars will be over 30 feet tall and wide. Very floriferous. And then Verbandica is another very popular Solangiana type with lighter pink color. Again, not much fragrance. Very vigorous, often grown as a clump form. Again, 20, 30 feet tall easily. I've seen a tree at the Arnold Arboretum that was probably 35, 40 feet tall and very floriferous. Lombardy Rose is one of my favorites. It's got this nice, interesting goblet-shaped flower. It blooms later, probably reaching full bloom in May. And you can see here kind of the foliage is more developed. It's kind of an open tree, a large tree, 30 feet by 30 feet, and nice dark color to it. And then Picture is widely available. It's got very large flowers for a Solangiana type and nice dark color. Very floriferous tree, vigorous grower, and certainly one to recommend. One of Phil Savage's plants, butterflies. And as far as yellow color goes, butterflies does produce a really nice yellow color, almost a true yellow, blooming just after the earliest magnolias. I've never seen it hit by the frost. There's a plant outside the Redwood Library that I've looked at closely over the last few years. It's got a nice fragrance to it. It's a smaller tree, but it will grow quickly and probably mature to larger than it's listed at in books. Maybe over time, 25 by 25. It's kind of got an open habit. Judy Zook, named after the former president of the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. And it's considered a yellow magnolia, but the flower color might range from yellow to kind of this peachy orange, and somewhere in between, depending on what the weather conditions have been. And it's a nice upright tree, very vigorous, kind of a narrow habit, and blooms probably towards the middle of May, maybe a little earlier. Genie, we've had flower in our nursery, and that's one from New Zealand, the product of the breeding work of Vance Hooper. And it's a very vigorous tree, kind of a narrow, compact shape to it, bloomed strongly at an early age, a grafted tree. And it's got this goblet shape. The flowers are a little smaller, maybe 3 by 3, but you can see the color even on the inside of the tepals is stained with this nice magenta pink color. And on the right, Sensation is one we've had bloom, and then the spectrum for flower color here runs the gamut. You can see the inside, kind of almost a white color. There might be peach, there might be pink, yellow, and even maybe some orange, depending on the conditions. It's a very upright plant, very vigorous grower. Both of these trees I would recommend for the smaller garden and where space might be limited. Big leaf magnolia, and you can see here pictured at the U.S. National Arboretum with southern magnolias in the backdrop. This plant will bloom in summertime. It's got massive foliage that has a very tropical appearance to it. It blooms sequentially in late spring, early summer. Massive flowers, very strong fragrance. Each teple is probably 6 to 8 inches long. The whole inflorescence might be 18 inches wide. This is a tree that will get quite large, upwards of 40, 50 feet tall. But it's certainly, it makes a statement in the landscape for sure. The tropical foliage is very amusing. I'm a big fan of this plant. The umbrella magnolia, Magnolia tripetala, native to the southeastern United States. And this magnolia also has the large tropical leaves. You can see here, I just missed it in bloom in the late spring, which was unfortunate. You can see the aggregates or these conglomerates of follicles, these seed pods, already developing early in the season. But you can see they get this nice dark red color, which is quite interesting. It's very visible in the landscape. It gets the name umbrella magnolia because of the outermost whorl of tepals kind of bends downward around the stem, kind of resembling that of an umbrella. 2 trees we saw in bloom at Broken Arrow Nursery in Connecticut, I believe on June 2nd. Fireworks, Magnolia officinalis variety biloba, is considered a color breakthrough. This tree was discovered in the garden of a New Jersey man who called up a local nursery, and they couldn't believe it. Typically, this species has kind of a yellow to white colored flower, but you can see here kind of the nice dark reddish pink color. This is another tree that has large tropical looking leaves. It might grow to 20, 30 feet tall. I think it's a little more restrained. This species is native to Asia, whereas the other 2 trees we just looked at are U.S. natives. So it's a little bit smaller than its U.S. counterparts. Nice fragrance to it. Apparently very difficult to clone, but it has now been used in further crosses. So it is the proud parent of another line of hybrids. And then on the right, Magnolia saboldii, the Oyama magnolia. And this is the cultivar colossus. And this is kind of a small shrubby plant with these nodding flowers, but they're very beautiful. They got very showy reproductive structures in the middle. These pure white flowers, very nicely fragranced. And the flowers kind of nod down, so you kind of have to peer under them to get a good look at the blooms. And a couple evergreen species that aren't really hardy in coastal New England, but I figured I'd share them. They're interesting plants. Magnolia dulcopa here in bloom in February at the Los Angeles County Arboretum. It was quite the sight. There was definitely a lot of interest in the plant. Not the most pleasant fragrance, but a very floriferous plant, maybe 20 feet tall. And on the right, Magnolia delavei, Delave's magnolia. I won this small plant at an auction, just a little seedling, was able to bring it back. It's another evergreen species, kind of similar in some ways to the southern magnolia. And I'm hoping to grow it under glass and get it to flower. So thank you for listening to my presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Morgan Palmer.
Hi everyone, I am Morgan Palmer, Plant Production Manager for the Newport Tree Conservancy, and today we're going to look a little bit at the botany of a magnolia flower and how it pertains to the propagation of those trees. So first, as Joe was saying, magnolias are a very old flowering tree, originating about 95 million years ago. This also means that they evolved before a lot of our more modern pollinators, things that we think about pollinating the plants around us today. So, evolved before bees, moths, butterflies, and even wasps. So, these magnolias then and today are primarily pollinated by beetles. Back then, they were flightless. Today, there's a wide array of these beetles that come to the magnolia flower. That specific pollinator has caused the magnolia to have some different adaptations that give the flower its unique beauty and function today. First, we're going to look at the flower bud stage. So here we can see a nice soft, fuzzy, almost catkin-like covering over the flower bud. This is called a perule. And essentially it's just that, a protection for the flower petals within. Below that, we'll see a growth bud, and this is actually going to be where the twig growth of the tree comes from this year. Most magnolias are determinate bloomers, meaning that they'll flower at the very end of their twigs, and that twig will no longer grow from that spot. It has to kind of shoot out from below the flower bud and make kind of a Y shape if it splits into two. Below that, we see the leaf bud. Kind of self-explanatory. This is where the leaves are going to come out. But you can tell for this variety, Magnolia butterflies, that the flower is going to emerge before the leaf. You could tell that just by the bud sizes. This is called precocious blooming. And that kind of applies to any tree or shrub that flowers before its leaves emerge. Now, something kind of fun and interesting about the flower bud itself this time of year is that it can be thermogenic, meaning that it produces its own heat, which helps it bloom in colder environments. So this bud right here is going to be using a little bit of extra energy to actually heat itself up above ambient temperature, above the air temperature around it, and bloom nice and early, even if it's cold. So once the flowers bloom, these beautiful, large, and interesting looking reproductive organs on the inside of the flower are revealed. First, we'll look at the carpels. So these kind of tendril-like yellow pieces in the center there, they are tough and they are adapted to protect the embryos within that stigmatic column from the beetles that pollinate them. They are the female parts that are receptive to pollen, and they basically are shaped this way to kind of trick the beetles into thinking that they're the male parts that have the pollen, because the beetles are ultimately after that protein-rich pollen. So to make them think that that's the male part where they're going to get that pollen kind of pulls them a little bit closer to that and tricks the beetles into pollinating the magnolia. So the stamens down here and the anthers, the base, that's the part that produces the pollen and support. I mean, the anthers are part of that. So the anthers are where the pollen is actually produced, and the stamens support the anthers. So this is where, at the base here, that's kind of purpley pink, reddish, that's where the beetles are really after. Because magnolias don't produce nectar like a lot of other flowers do. Their main attractor to these pollinating things is just that protein-rich pollen. Down at the base, you'll see it's pointing towards what looks like a petal, but it's called a tepal. So magnolias typically show no difference between a sepal and a petal. So a sepal is kind of the green petal-like pieces that you typically see under a flower's brightly colored petals. And the petals being, of course, the brightly colored thing that you'd see on any other flower. So because there's not really a difference between these two visually, magnolias have the unique name of tepal to refer to all of them. Once the carpels are pollinated, the stigmatic column grows. So once all these little bits are pollinated, it extends, and each one of those carpels that received pollen that has an embryo on the underside will begin to swell. And as the other surrounding flower pieces fall away, that is all that's going to remain. And we'll look at that in the next slide. So overall, these botanical features evolved to be really robust to withstand the imperfect methods of pollination. So to attract these beetles to begin with, the magnolia flowers can use that same thermogenetic technique to basically activate the scent oils that are within the flower. Because there's no nectar, it's not an all-around attractive flower for them to come to, but when the scent oils are activated once in the morning and once in the evening, it tells the beetles to come and pollinate it. But the tricky thing is, like I said before, only one section of the flower is active at a time. So the pollen is only available at one time of day, and the carpels are only receptive to pollen one time a day. So the same scents that are released by that thermogenetic process to attract beetles to the pollen, basically telling them when the pollen is ready to eat, are being used again when the carpels are ready to receive that pollen. Again, trying to trick the beetle into thinking that they're getting the pollen when there is none. This ultimately allows the pollen from other flowers to be deposited on the stigma because neither part are active and attractive to a beetle at the same time. Once the magnolia flower has been pollinated, the stigmatic column is all that remains, and it is allowed to grow and swell and produce the seed. So this part here, this conglomerate of follicles, as it's called, kind of looks like a cone, like a conifer cone, but again, it's another kind of unique part of magnolia botany. So each one of those carpels here, you can see that they've split open and contain either one or two seeds. That depends on the species of the magnolia. So the seeds, or the fruit, they kind of look like berries, and they're often really colorful, but it has a specific coating called an aril, A-R-I-L. It's not as fleshy and soft as a berry would be. It's kind of more rigid and waxy. And like I said, they're very colorful. They can be pink, orange, crimson. It's very bright and appealing to birds and other things that want to come and eat them. They're eye-catching. So on the right here, you can see this berry is being pulled out, or this seed fruit is being pulled out of a split carpel. So that's what that kind of little stringy guy in that previous slide is feeding the embryo in there. Um, and the funny part about pulling these guys apart is this little silk thread that seems to kind of hold the seed within, but it also allows it to dangle out of the conglomerate of follicles. So if it's hanging on the tree, it kind of just gently dangles the seed below it. You can kind of see it in the picture on the left, kind of near my fingers, that those seeds are kind of just hanging in the breeze and making them easier for a bird to come along and eat them and distribute them to places that aren't directly below the shade of the parent tree. It's just part of their distribution system. So, preparing for planting. As you can see, I have a good amount of these conglomerates of follicles that have swollen up and been harvested from the tree. So these are from a cucumber magnolia, which is kind of known for having an uneven pollination. So you won't see a fully swollen conglomerate. You kind of get these little nodules that stick out, and each one of those contains a seed. So if you harvest them at this stage where they're kind of pink, as you can see in the top right, kind of that pink blush, but they haven't cracked open yet, they can continue to ripen in a nice sunny spot. So that's what this tray of all these follicle conglomerates are doing. We harvested them before any birds had a chance to come and eat the berries. So to finish off that ripening process in a nice sunny dry area, eventually they'll begin to crack open. You can see the carpels cracking open again in that top right corner, and on the right side the carpels popping open and those beautiful bright colored seeds sticking out of them. Once the carpels have split open enough for easy access to all the seeds within, the next step is to remove the seeds from the aril, or removing the aril from the seeds. This is kind of a tedious job. It can be done by letting them sit and almost mush the aril off of them. But ultimately, you just want to remove that brightly colored outer area aril to reveal the little black seed within. Now, there's one more step to this because the aril leaves this waxy, oily coating on the seeds, and that residue has been found to kind of inhibit germination. So it's important to wash it off. And you can use a little bit of dish soap and just kind of scrub them all and get it off as best you can. So once that waxy coating is removed, the seeds can be soaked and tested for viability. So you can see on the left here, all those seeds that have sunk to the bottom of that beaker are viable. They're far more likely to germinate, whereas the ones on the top are a little less likely to. They can be soaked overnight, or they should be soaked overnight, to ensure full hydration before being planted. And some of those seeds that are floating on the top might sink overnight, and that little extra hydration increases their viability. So now the seeds have been prepped, they're still not quite ready to plant. So here you can see that it does look like they're getting planted, but this is part of a moist-cold stratification. So essentially, I've potted them up into these little trays with our normal kind of potting mix with a little bit of bark added to it, just so it doesn't stay too wet, and then a little bit of vermiculite to retain a more consistent moisture level. So we've planted them in here and we bury them and label them. It's very important. Keep everything straight. And we've put them in a cooler. And most magnolias need about 3 months, or at least 3 months, in 40-degree temperatures. And this moist cold stratification is essentially simulating a winter. So once that time is up, the seeds are removed from the stratification material and planted at better spacing, because you could see they were all just kind of piled on top of each other to go into the cold. But giving them a little bit more space allows them to grow without interfering with each other as much once they germinate. So normally we would like to do this in an outdoor raised bed so they can sprout this season and be dug up next year, because they don't really like to be disturbed the first year that they sprout. But since we are in the process of moving, they're being seeded in a tray so that they can come with us. So I just made sure to fill this tray up to the very top with soil to make sure their roots have enough room to get going. So if all goes well, we'll have some lovely little seedlings by the end of the year. Here are a couple from last year. These are all seedlings from the Merrill Magnolia at the Art Museum in front of the Cushing Gallery. They were also overwintered in that same cooler that they were moist stratified in, so a couple of months at about 40 degrees. And right now they are living in our cold frame to get more acclimated to the spring temperatures, and so they can grow on outside this year. The second way that we are propagating magnolias is through grafting. Grafting is essentially the process of cloning that provides a more robust root system more quickly for a chosen clone. This is the first year that Newport Tree Conservancy is cloning a magnolia, so that's pretty exciting, but it is a process that we use every year in our heritage tree program. It's essentially a more reliable way to propagate older trees than by cuttings, where you kind of have to baby a small root system for a while to make sure it survives. So these lovely flowers in this slide are from a Magnolia denudata at Chateau-sur-Mer, which is the magnolia that we propagated this year, a very large and beautiful tree on their property. So grafting starts with a rootstock that has to be compatible with the species of the chosen mother plant. So here on the left we have a Magnolia cobus, and that is our rootstock, usually seed grown and mass produced. And on the right is that Magnolia denudata at Chateau. So we are combining these two so that a cutting of a twig of that Magnolia denudata is being attached to the cobus in such a way that only the denudata will be growing in the future. There are a couple different methods of grafting, but in essence the basis of them all are the same. So we make careful slices on both the rootstock and the scion wood in such a way that their cambium layers are exposed. And when they're wrapped together, those cambium layers of the two pieces are tightly pressed together so that when they begin to heal, they're essentially creating one union. They're healing together and turning into one plant. So the method that we use of grafting these magnolias is called a side veneer. And then it has a little Rhode Island twist, which is having that extra flap that wraps around the outside of the scion wood, as you can see in the picture on the left. So once those cuts are made, they're wrapped really tightly together with some kind of rubber band, typically, as you can see on the right, mushing those cambium layers together. So once these are done, they are kept in a sealed humidity tent with moist peat moss, and it's entirely closed for about 2 weeks. And that keeping it about 70 degrees also, so that consistent moisture with warm temperatures helps promote healing and callousing. So we want these two pieces to callus together. Once that 2 weeks is up, we begin to gradually open the tent and get the grafts more acclimated to outside humidity temperatures and sunlight. But once the grafts successfully take and they begin to grow, we go through and we cut back the rootstock just above where the graft union is to ensure that the scion wood is the only thing that grows. And with many grafts, you always have to keep track of the rootstock. Even if there's seemingly no buds on it, if there's something below where the graft union is that begins to grow, it's not the plant that you've cloned. It can be whatever the rootstock was, and that can have a tendency to be more robust and overtake the graft, the desired graft. Here we have a peek into our humidity tent. So these are all of our heritage tree grafts, including the Magnolias. You can visually see it's nice and humid in there. Camera's all fuzzy. Lots of nice, happy, healthy little leaves that hopefully indicate we got some good take. We will open this up on Monday, and we're really hoping to see a lot of nice little calluses, maybe even some happy little leaves and sprouts. And we're looking forward to a very promising grafting season. I'm going to turn it over to Joe for one last little segment, but thank you all for joining us.
So I'm going to talk about growing magnolias in your garden in coastal New England, Rhode Island area. So magnolia is like a loamy, well-drained soil. They don't really like consistently moist, soggy soils, but they are adaptable plants. They do like a nice, slightly acidic soil. That's not really a problem in our soils in this region. And they can grow in a well-drained soil, a sharply drained soil, but they need to be kept moist during times of drought. Full sun and protected location. Full sun for best flowering. Magnolias flower best in full sun, but they should be provided a protected location, afternoon shade. Could be other trees or a building. And they are subject to frost cracking, so they don't really like to be in an area that heats up super quick, and that can damage a tree. Transplant balled and burlapped or from a container. The magnolia root system is kind of fleshy and coarse, and you kind of have to be gentle with it. But a pot-bound plant should be teased out, and the root system should kind of be flared out in all directions. And always inspect the plant if you can in the nursery. You'll thank me later. Take it out of the pot if it's a container plant and take a look. Make sure it has a nice, healthy root system. And rotted roots will kind of be brown and yellow, maybe shriveled up. So check out for those and remove those when planting. And of course, water regularly after planting. Don't let it dry out, especially if you're planting later in the spring and earlier in the fall when it's a little bit warmer. It's best to plant when it's a little cooler outside, 50s, 40s, early spring, and a little later in the fall even. And provide a mulch circle, a few inches thick. It'll suppress the weeds and retain some moisture. Magnolias should be pruned in the summer, and really dead and dying and diseased branches, the 3Ds of pruning, that can be done year-round. And, of course, protect from critters. Deer are damaging, but I've heard of rabbits and even squirrels doing damage to magnolias. So protect, especially right after planting, when the tree is small. And you can see here we've taken some precautionary measures on Galaxy in Morton Park. They did some damage, but the tree is vigorous and is healed quite well. And then we also have a picture on the right there of magnolias in our nursery. That's Maryland's Choice, and that's a plant that we'll have available in our upcoming planting programs. So good luck, and grow those magnolias. So thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful spring. Enjoy the magnolias and other trees, and there's a lot to look forward to, so enjoy.